Hi, everyone. I would like to thank you for joining to our second edition of Let's Talk Regulation. My name is Celia Cruz. I'm today's host. I'm a member of EIT Health Alumni Board as a regional coordinator for InnoStar South. And professionally, I also work as regulatory affairs and quality management of medical devices. As regulatory affairs management manager at BigMed, a startup from this community, and also as a consultant at Compliar. I would like just to briefly introduce you to EIT Health Alumni. It's a community of health innovators. We are more than 2,000 members, active members. And these members have participated in EIT Health and EIT Health alumni activities, such as this one. And our goal is to connect enthusiast alumni to be able to answer their needs, being training, networking, job hiring opportunities, among others. So if you are participating in an activity or by the end of this activity, if you'd like to join, feel free to register into the alumni network at alumni.eithealth.eu. So just as digital housekeeping, feel free to ask questions through the chat box below, and we'll get back to you either throughout the session or in the end of the session. To start our talk, I'm really happy to introduce you to our guest speaker today, Lott. She has supported more than 100 companies with regulatory strategy, regulatory submissions, quality systems, compliance, due diligence, technical support, and even grief counseling, as Michelle likes to say, because I mean, dealing with these regulators and all these regulatory issues can be emotionally draining and exhausting. So, Michelle, thank you so much for being here today. I pass the virtual floor to you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the invitation. I look forward to speaking with everybody. So I'm Michelle. I'm the principal and founder of leanRAQA. I have over 20 years of experience in the life science space. I have been an advisor on an FDA Good Manufacturing Practices Advisory Committee. And as Celia said, I pride myself on being a grief counselor to walk you through the regulatory stages of grief that can be associated with talking to the FDA and notified bodies. This is my C-suite team. So these are my dogs that keep me entertained and keep me relaxed in the regulatory stressful situations. So today we're going to go through the FDA risk-based medical device classification scheme. We're going to talk about preparing your submission and the differences in the type and timelines for those submissions. And then we're going to talk about pre-market approval and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. So mistakes that you can avoid to sabotage your submission. So we're going to start with the FDA risk-based medical device classification model. And this broken down into 4 basic classes. You have class 1, which is your lowest risk. These include things like Band-Aids, handheld surgical instruments. They are make up 45 to 50% of the regulated devices. Class 2 makes up another 40 to 45%. And these are the moderate risk devices, infusion pumps, wheelchairs, surgical masks, a hot topic of regulation right now. Class 3 makes up 5 to 10% of the market. These are the high-risk, implantable, life-supporting, life-sustaining devices. And then there's a group of unclassified devices that are pre-amendment or the regulations that put in the classification for these other device types. So that's kind of a quirky class, and that makes up less than 5% of devices on the market. So where it gets really complex is understanding the exemptions that apply to the different classifications. Typically, class 1s are 510K exempt, but there's also a subset that are GMP exempt as well, so good manufacturing practices exempt. Then most of them require general controls, and that can include registration and listing, basic quality system requirements, and there's even a small, like 5 to 10 devices that are class 1 that do require a 510K. Class 2s typically require a 510K, but again, the exemptions can get tricky to understand and properly apply. There are a subset of class 2s that are exempt from 510Ks. There's also a subset that in addition to a 510K, you have other performance requirements. Same thing for the class 3 PMA devices. In most cases, they're going to require pre-market approval, but there is a small subset that is also PMA exempt and requires a 510K rather than a PMA. And then at the unclassified devices, for the most part, are all 510K devices and functionally treated like class 2 in risk. So long story short, this is kind of all the combinations of classifications, special controls, and exemptions that can apply. So it's not an easy process sometimes to understand and apply all of the correct controls for your device. And the mistake I typically see people make is that they think that if they hit a certain set of exemptions, that they basically won the lottery. And even if you hit all of the exemptions, so you get a class 1, 510K exempt and GMP exempt, you still have responsibilities for establishment registration every year, device listing every year, and your QMS has to cover a system for complaints reporting and quality records, no matter what. So preparing your submission. This can range everything from a walk in the park if you're in that class 1 510K exempt to the complexity of running and training for an Ironman with a PMA. So we'll start with the 510K. This is the marketing application for low and moderate risk devices. It is based on a paradigm called substantial equivalence between the new device and the legally marketed device. And substantial equivalence involves the comparison of your intended use, your indications for use, your device features, performance testing, and choosing the right predicate is key. While it is tough and not a quick entry to market or commercialization for a 510K, this is more like running a half marathon rather than a marathon or Ironman. So there are 4 types of 510Ks now. There is the traditional 510K, which is how most devices come to market. It's heavily based on your predicate comparison. There's an abbreviated 510K that relies on a predicate comparison to a point, but it's really relying on special controls, namely guidance documents or recognized consensus standards to demonstrate its safety and effectiveness. The newest pathway is an abbreviated 510K based on the safety and performance paradigm that FDA just created. This has to be very device type specific, and only certain devices are eligible. And I think it's only 5 or 6 that FDA has this special controls type of guidance documents out for this type of 510K. And then the predicate discussion here is even more limited in scope than the other 2 types of 510Ks discussed so far. For a special 510K, this is changes specifically to your own legally marketed device. So this isn't appropriate for a device you acquired, or you want to make a change to somebody else's device, but you don't want to do your own 510K. You have to own the device. It's limited to 3 changes made at a time. In the past, I've seen an abuse of the special 510K program, and I've seen companies try to make, upwards of 20 plus changes and trying to say, well, they're all minor risk changes, so they're all eligible for a special 510K. And the FDA recently revamped the special 510K program and kind of really whittled that down and limited it in scope to 3 changes. And then it's also limited to the types of changes and technological features and performance testing that you can make under the scope of the special 510K. So we've been talking about substantial equivalence and how selecting a predicate and the predicate discussion is extremely important to that submission process. So you can see here, we have our proposed device, and we have 3 possible predicates that we can pick from. We've got one that seems like the obvious choice. It looks like green apple to green apple. We have an option where we're going to have to discuss the difference between the green apple and red apple. And then we have one that looks like it's obviously not an appropriate predicate, besides the fact that it's also a fruit. However, everybody says you can't compare apples to oranges. Well, what if this was your predicate device? What does your proposed predicate discussion look like now? Well, now you can use a paradigm called primary predicates and reference predicate devices. So we have our proposed device, and it is functionally the same in almost all technological features, except for this one feature that we need to pull in for discussion to demonstrate that, hey, yes, we've got this orange, juicy, pulpy inside, which is different from our primary predicate, but it is a well-known, cleared in terms of safety and technology. So therefore, it doesn't raise any new questions of safety and efficacy for the agency. The next type of submission is called a de novo. A de novo has no existing classification, regulation, or clear predicate, or it poses new technological features that go beyond the intended use or intended classification of existing devices. De novo literally means of new. And so it's the marketing process for novel medical devices. The result of the de novo process is that you get a classification regulation issued at the end of this process. So it actually produces new law, new product codes, and new paths to market for subsequent devices. And this is usually where the of new devices are down classified into 510K class 2 devices with special controls. And it's an alternative to the PMA program, where you obviously have devices that are not as high risk as life supporting and life sustaining devices. But again, a classification doesn't exist. It is a reduced regulatory and burden and cost compared to the PMA process. And you have to make an argument around the risk benefit profile of your device. It's one of the most important parts of a de novo. And the lift on this is a little bit more training for a marathon in terms of commitment and duration. Finally, you have a PMA for high-risk devices. This is devices that have to have a very high and reasonable assurance of safety and efficacy. And the evidence has to stand on its own. It's not related to a substantial equivalence discussion or comparing yourself to other devices and technology on the market. This is a very long and arduous process to market, like training for the Ironman that has all the things in it. And you spend years training, years becoming an expert in all the different factors, and then a lot of time and money invested in getting across the finish line to market. So the difference in the submission types, cost, and timeframes is the 510K ends up being 500 to 1,000 pages. The more 510Ks I do as time goes by, that is becoming more like 1,000 to 1,500 pages because of the changing burden for performance testing. The FDA timelines say that the traditional and abbreviated can get cleared in 90 days and special is 30. However, in reality, I tell people to prepare, for 100 to 150 days for the main two types of submissions, and that you need to really brace for about 5 months going back and forth with the FDA on a traditional and abbreviated 510K. You do not have to do a pre-approval inspection for 510Ks, and the user fee, if you get your small business designation, which you have to apply for 60 days in advance of putting your submission in, is about $3,000. This results in you being able to use the term market clearance rather than market approval. At the result of the end of that process is the term that the FDA has said is okay. So de novo, again, if it's not, can't make a substantial equivalent argument, and but it's of moderate safety, you can do the de novo. It's going to depend on the de novo request. FDA's published timeline is 120. I'm seeing that those are taking upwards of 200 days to clear, and that's just agency time to review them. This is going to result in, if you're approved, you're going to get a classification designation. Your fee is going to be $27,000, and you're going to get to say you have market clearance. If you're denied, you're going to have to go the PMA route. That fee is $90,000+, and that's when you get to say you have pre-market approval rather than pre-market clearance, because the FDA has actually reviewed your data individually. You've had extensive clinical trials, and they say that we have literally put our seal of approval here. PMA, again, you have to have extensive scientific evidence, including clinical trials. The lift here becomes 30+ 3-ring binders of data back in the old days when you used to have to print and ship. The FDA says that these take between 250 and 300. You really need to prepare for the better part of a year for a PMA. You do have to do a pre-approval inspection as a part of the pre-market approval process, and that does apply to all your manufacturing sites if you're using a contract manufacturer. Again, the fee is $90,000 plus or minus, and you get to say pre-market approval. Okay, pre-market approval and the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. So these are common mistakes that I see companies make. So we have the stages of regulatory grief, and I actually have these on my website as services I provide. But grief always starts with denial, which often results in a poor pre-market strategy. Then people become angry because their post-market commercialization plan is also poor and ineffective. Then they want to bargain with the FDA, but you can't divorce the FDA if you need to get medical device clearance in the US. Depression, is bad. You have a bad design controls process that has likely created your denial and anger. And then acceptance, if you begin with the end in mind, how you can avoid all these stages of grief. So denial, poor pre-market strategy. So I typically see startups that have to make pitches, and I see investors that think, okay, the company has a great pitch, check. The financial projections look great. There's a market need for it, check. The device concept makes sense, check. And the company is confident in their own regulatory strategy. So you've got everything you need, right? Well, wrong. All these things do not really add up to doing the right things at the right time. I typically see, especially startups that have done the research themselves. And for non-regulatory people, regulations can be underestimated and they can jeopardize your compliance. Again, your assumptions about what exemptions and controls apply to you may not be correct. Then they can also be overwhelming and they can impede your business success. If you don't understand how to navigate them properly, it can really slow you down. Or you can do the wrong testing or the wrong type of submission. And then doing too little, too late. This is where most people call us, where they say, oh, we're ready for our FDA submission and we just need you to put our 510K together. But this is where they should have called us. So the right time for your regulatory strategy is right in between your concept development, early feasibility, and market validation, because that's going to plan out what you need out of the performance for your prototype. And because it's going to outline your testing strategy, your budget, and your timeline. And then it's going to also predict what you need for that first round of investment to get that testing and the regulatory work done. So, the right time for, design controls is obviously when you're designing your device. It's the right time to do a pre-submission. And then you need to do all this on production equivalent runs. And you really need regulatory support throughout this whole process before you even get to the point where you're ready to do the actual 510K or de novo. After you get clearance or approval, you need the rest of the QMS besides your design controls module to be built out. We typically do this while the FDA is reviewing a submission. Then after your first production run and as the product is getting in the market, we need to do ongoing review of claims on your marketing materials. And then after your first sale and as your business starts scaling, you need a post-market surveillance plan. You need to start with some of the management controls, including management review and internal audit. And if you don't do the right things at the right time, this results in you having to build all of these things retrospectively, and you have to get in your time machine and go back to your concept development to really get the documentation that you could have been building all along that's going to be needed for a successful submission. So other common mistakes I see is being in love with your own science. And, I see a lot of companies apply what I call the transitive property of math. And this is where A equals B, B equals C. So you can logically assume A equals C. Well, it doesn't work like that with the FDA. You have to do the work to prove that A equals B and B equals C before FDA will accept A and C are equal. And so I see a lot of people make assumptions about what their technology and their science implies and think that it's so logical that the FDA will be on board, and they're not. If you're the inventor of the technology, but you've never run a business before, maybe you're not the best position for the CEO role. Maybe you're more of a CTO or CMO, and you need to get the right people with the complementary skill sets to round out your team, and don't try to do it by yourself. And then if needed, are you willing to make compromise in the product offering, technology, or claims if it will build you a stepwise path to market and an easier market entry based off of a smaller claim set or a more limited technological feature? So for the anger stage in post-market commercialization, I always joke that this is the classic battle between R&D and quality. And engineering typically tries to make a lot of justifications to not do testing. But the more stringent regulations become, you need to just stop fighting and start developing the scientific evidence needed for your submission to be successful. And some of those justifications are getting increasingly hard to make without, they have their own, even to write a justification now, there's its own set of testing that you have to make to write the justification to avoid doing other testing. So it's just getting more complicated than the risk of it slowing down or stopping your submission is worth. So you need to evaluate if you need preclinical testing, if you need side-by-side bench testing, if you need performance to like recognize consensus standards, if maybe you need an animal or clinical model, and then usability engineering is an ever increasing hot topic. I also see people misunderstand that their marketing claims also have to be substantiated with testing. And if you're making marketing claims along the lines of twice as fast, improves, better than, all those things, you have to have engineering testing to support those statements. Otherwise, it could lead to you being up-classified if you make new or previously unsubstantiated claims, or if you end up inadvertently implying new intended uses. It could also get you in trouble with when the United States is the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission, who also evaluate claims from a different perspective than FDA. So bargaining, you can't divorce the FDA. So the law pretty much says you two must marry. This is an arranged marriage. Your first impressions matter. And I see people who want to avoid the pre-sub or the 513G process because they would rather ask forgiveness than permission. But I say, okay, if you know you're going to get married, don't you want to at least meet once before you get to the altar? And it's important to me, the more conversations you can have with the FDA and your company about your technology and your product in advance of going into your actual submission, the more you de-risk your strategy by understanding what they want to see out of your submission and your testing, or what they view as challenges. So here are some don'ts. Don't under communicate. Again, not submitting a pre-sub at all. If you have anything new or novel about your device, you need to get the FDA used to the idea before you go and get their buy-in before you select your submission type and go into to a review. Same thing, I've seen people over communicate when they're trying to get out of doing certain testing and write justifications. And so that they just kind of keep, giving the FDA all these workarounds than trying to get real meaningful feedback. And that kind of goes into the next one, covering your ears, not listening to what FDA has to say about your product, or you did your pre-submission on yourself and you really didn't understand what the FDA was asking for. I make a joke that everybody thinks that, oh, the regulations are written in English. I read and speak in English, so I know what these say and what the requirements are. But I guarantee you, FDA is a whole different dialect about what they meant when they told you you should do this, or any number of other terms that they use that they have their own meetings for. The other common mistake is assuming that your competitors have brought their product to market underneath the correct regulatory path. And this is where navigating those exemptions gets particularly tricky. And I've had clients come to me and say, oh, so-and-so brought their device to market underneath this class 1 device, but while it was similar, it was very clear that the intended use of that competitor was exceeded the scope of what the FDA intended for the exemptions. I've also seen clients who are well connected politically try to make phone calls and have the FDA bullied into making a favorable decision because the company has connections with so-and-so's secretary or whatnot of state, and that did not end well. So classic winning strategies: don't go in with an approach of asking for forgiveness. It's much better to ask for permission and get a collaborative relationship with the FDA. And so this can be a marriage made in hell, or it can be a marriage made in heaven. And it's your choice of how you view the FDA, if you're going to view them as a necessary evil versus a strategic partner in getting to market. It's going to significantly affect the success of your submission and your time to commercialization. So you really, from a business perspective, benefit from treating the FDA as a strategic partner. So depression, bad design controls. Your patent is not equal to your design controls. I can't tell you the number of times that somebody came to me and they had a patent and they said, oh, we're ready to get a 510K, but they didn't go through the design controls process or documentation methodology at all. All they had was a patent and a prototype. So I had, again, nothing to turn in. And then it turned out oftentimes their device wasn't manufacturable, or it couldn't meet the design verification and validation requirements. So some don'ts and related to design controls and developing your product. Don't be an ostrich. If there's a new standard out, know that it exists, know what it requires. If you're not going to follow it, be prepared with a rationale for why or why it's not appropriate. Go retro only in your home decor. Don't go retro in trying to use old data to make justifications, particularly in the areas of biocompatibility. I've had clients give me things that look like they were written on a dot matrix computer back from the early 90s and say, here, turn this in as my biocompatibility report and write a justification. Don't modify standards just so you can pass, or change your acceptance criteria after the fact because you failed your verification and validation. And then don't destroy evidence. This is an actual piece of report from a client where they found this in a file where it had been taped back together, and it's from the early 80s. So acceptance, this is how you're going to be successful, is by beginning with the end in mind. And so particularly in startups that are using subcontracting their manufacturing, they assume that just because they're the brand owner and they're the legal manufacturer, they don't have to have a QMS because their contract manufacturer is responsible. And this is true only to a point. No matter what, you are responsible for a subset of quality management systems. As a your contract manufacturer, if you select it, you need to make sure you select one that either already is registered with the FDA or can easily be. Also see the specification developer select design houses or contract manufacturers that aren't capable or really don't want to register with the FDA, and then they get years into their investment with this partner and figure out that they really can't take them into commercialization. Assuming that once you get your submission cleared or approved, that it's the end of the race, that's when the real work begins, because you have to think about your quality management system and your good manufacturing practices, which are outlined in 21 CFR 820. So there's a whole level of documentation that you have to have and again, even if you're a specification developer, that we have to put in place for you to fully commercialize. So, do you guys have any questions?
We have a couple questions, maybe as we are a little bit ahead of time. Maybe you can work on this out, and then we can have a couple of the questions in the end. So Michelle, we had a question. Is it possible to get in the FDA breakthrough device program with 510K?
Technically, yes, but the breakthrough device is to treat either things that there are already cleared technologies. So just by the factor of what it was created for, it's very rare that it's could result in a 510K instead of a de novo.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Also, we have another one. How much effort would you put into finding predicates for a relatively novel device rather than going straight for the de novo application? Can you combine 3 or more devices as predicates for a new product?
That would have to be an extremely strategic analysis, and it would definitely be something I would do a pre-sub for rather than trying a 510K right off the bat. And the predicate discussion is important even in a de novo. You're not necessarily using them for traditional predicates, but you're using them to build your benefit risk profile, which is the key for the de novo application. So you're comparing your product in terms of safety and efficacy and benefit and risk to other technologies that are out there, even though you're new and novel.
Great, perfect. We have another one still from this batch of questions. Can you briefly explain about enforcement discretion? When can you ask about this? Is it possible to be a class 2 under enforcement discretion? I have seen companies marketing as class 1 under enforcement discretion.
So that's when I put up that exemption chart, that's where it's super important to understand how all those exemptions come together. So enforcement discretion essentially means that the FDA is choosing not to enforce any type of oversight, including registration and listing. So a lot of general wellness devices and applications, several mobile medical devices, computer display products, all fall under enforcement discretion depending on their intended use. But there's no such thing as a class 2 device that falls under enforcement discretion, because even if it is 510K exempt, it still has to fall under the special controls that are relevant to it, which include general controls of registration and listing. Even if they're 510K exempt, they have to have design controls applied. So just as any other class 2 device, and they have to have full quality management systems. So the term enforcement discretion wouldn't apply to a class 2 or really even to a class 1 device, because both of those have general and special controls that are outside of enforcement discretion.
Thank you. Meanwhile, there was 2 more. What about the classification as a medical device accessory? What are the requirements and what would be the regulatory pathway?
That one is a little tricky as well. There's a special type of application that you can put in if you're trying to not be regulated underneath the same product code as the parent device. And this is more common where the parent device is a class 2 or class 3, some class 2s, and the accessory you're trying to market clearly should not come to market through a PMA like the parent device did, because it's a lower regulatory class. But there's a special kind of pre-submission that you do to get your accessory classified with the FDA.
Okay, great. And the last question, Is there a guidance or a tool available to help companies classify device?
You really just have to know how to work the FDA databases and how to search your predicates, how to find their registration and listings, find how they brought their products to market, and then see if the way they did it in the regulation description is appropriate for your product. And you guys can go on my website and download what I call the regulatory pathway assessment, which is how I navigate and document the whole regulatory strategy and predicate search, just as point of reference.
Can you just tell your website so that people go there faster?
It's www.leanRAQA.com.
Great. I know, meanwhile, there were some more questions, but we can get to them in the end. Maybe we can go to our second speaker. Thank you so much, Michelle. I think this was an amazing presentation, and I love your analogies with grief, love, marriage, and divorce with the FDA. I think it's always great to get some fun on these issues. So we'll go for our next speaker, Shivang Dave, the CEO of Planoptica, and Carlos Santiago, Director of Engineering. Just give me a second while I promote them as panelists. So Planoptica has passed through one of these pathways to enter into the USA market, and they will give you a little bit of their perspective on an experience on it. Thank you so much, Shivang, for accepting our invitation. Not sure.
Can you see me okay?
Yes.
All right, I'll go ahead and share the screen. So I figured what I'm not sure how many folks are in the audience and what all your backgrounds are. So I figured I would go ahead and do a quick presentation about what Planoptica is doing, and then just kind of talk to you, answer questions about how we thought through regulatory and things like that. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, and I'm also joined by Carlos Santiago, our Director of Engineering. He was our first employee and has been with us for 5 years. And he's been a lot of the effort behind the regulatory system. So our focus is to innovate, scale, and to help eye care professionals and eye care organizations scale up their capacity globally. This is our device being used in Africa and in South India. And before I start, I wanted to say, a big shout out to all of our team members. We have a great set of advisors, board members, team members, and co-founders. And it's everything I'm going to present is really truly a group effort. So the problem we're trying to address is that there's estimates are between 1.5 and 2.5 billion people in low and middle income countries who don't have the glasses they need. It's pretty intuitive to imagine the impacts it has on child's education or the independence of an elderly person or the economic productivity of a middle-aged person. And these are some of the stats. This is a picture I took at one of the big slums in India where I was traveling with an eye care NGO many years ago. And you can see this is a very big problem, affects all aspects of life. It affects economics, education, independence. And so the question is, why is there so many people who don't have a $5 pair of prescription glasses that could improve their life? And the reason is there's just not enough eye care professionals globally. And so this is a very big famous eye hospital in South India that has long lines. And this is an old picture, but the point is that there just aren't enough eye care professionals to help. And they tend to be located in urban centers, right, or at clinics. And additional barriers to vision testing and eyeglasses are that vision screening campaigns, when people go out into villages and city, communities with eye charts and do vision screening, that's great, but it's not accurate enough to give you an eyeglass prescription, and it's infrequent. It happens once every year or a few years. Eye care professionals themselves, there's not enough. There's a need for hundreds of thousands of more eye care professionals globally. It takes, anywhere between 1 and 4 years of training, depending on which country and what regulations you're abiding to. And then, there's just not enough access points. There's not enough locations for people to access eyeglasses. And this is a huge problem, especially in low and middle income countries. And the clinical equipment that makes eye care professionals very reliable and accurate and efficient, like these big desktop autorefractors, tend to be in high-end clinics in urban settings where a lot of the population cannot reach. So an ideal solution is something that's easy to scale globally, like a vision screening campaign starts approaching the accuracy of the gold standard. The optometrist doing subjective refraction can be deployed anywhere, and it's portable and low cost enough to be robust enough for the field. And that's what we've developed. We call our solution QuickSee. It's a scalable solution. It's already been deployed in over 2.5 million patients across 30 plus countries since we launched it in late 2018, early 2019. We specifically designed it to be accurate, so it matches the gold standard, subjective refraction, in approximately 90% of patients, and I'll show you some of the clinical data. We have specifically designed it so it's easy. It's requires very little training, and it's very fast for both the technician and the patient. And this is an NGO we work with that operates in sub-Saharan Africa, and they train unemployed youth to become kind of micro vision entrepreneurs with our device and some other technologies to improve last mile access to basic eye care. And it's portable and flexible enough to be used even in high-end settings, and it works in all lighting conditions. And over the years, we've been blessed to be recognized for the device and its impacts in various competitions and by various organizations that are who's who in eye care, including the International Agency for Prevention of Blindness. And Carlos, who's on the call, he was designated last fall as an eye health hero by the IAPB, which was a very big honor. And we have registered with the FDA and have CE mark. And I was telling you, to the points brought up earlier, right? You do need to do rigorous clinical testing. You need to be able to stand by what you're saying. And we've done over 12 clinical studies now, published all the results on over 3,000 patients in all kinds of settings, many different countries, from high-end eye care clinics to nonprofits in very rural areas of the world, and work with a lot of different players. And the quick value proposition that we've developed is that this device helps optometrists provide value-add services in clinics in the US. I won't go too much into that. And in low and middle income countries, low resource settings, this helps eye care organizations and governments reach the unreached patients at scale. And so our whole theory of change is helping build capacity, scale, stakeholder impact. And we've done this very rigorously over the last many years, hand in hand with these eye care organizations and professionals. And so the accuracy of our device helps improve the efficiency of an existing doctor, makes them more impactful wherever they are. It increases the scaling ability of your ability to train new technicians. And because it's portable and can be used anywhere, it really allows you to reach the last mile patients and have the impact that we want to have. And so here's some of the funding we've had in the press and publications, some of the prizes. And this is really our vision, which is to transform the lives and help eye care organizations and governments and eye care professionals reach those who need vision correction, make them more efficient, and make vision correction more democratized globally, and have these kinds of impacts. And so this is a talk really about regulatory, but I wanted to paint that context so you guys as the audience members could understand where we're coming from in our experience. So, I agree with everything that's been said so far. And, some of the questions that were posed to me were, why did we choose to do the FDA and the CE mark? Well, we're a company that's based in both Boston and Madrid. We were interested in both markets. So, that's the simple answer. Those were two important markets for us, but also when you get CE mark or you register with the FDA, right? Especially CE mark opens up a lot of doors globally in these other countries. So that was really important. And, our advice to you as entrepreneurs who are in the medical device space and thinking about taking your technologies forwards is we would suggest to do both simultaneously. And what I mean by that is both systems have slightly different standards and regulations. And if you build your quality management system, which you've learned from the previous talk is quite involved, if you make it just for the FDA and then later decide to do it for CE mark, you're kind of doubling up work. You could do it much more efficiently if you take into account your business plans up front and say, okay, we want to expand globally, we want to expand in those 2 markets. Let's take into account both sets of regulations and make a quality management system that's compliant with both. So that was our strategy. One strong piece of advice I would give all the entrepreneurs listening is, in addition to working with very talented regulatory experts and consultants and organizations, you should also build in your own in-house expertise. And that's why I wanted Carlos to join. And if you have questions, he can help address them. But the reason this is important, if you don't understand regulatory at all, you're just beholden, your business strategy, your management decisions are beholden to what a regulatory external person will tell you. And if you spend the time up front, which takes a lot of time and effort, but you go learn, you're not going to train yourself to be as qualified as a regulatory consultant, right? But you can learn enough to really start speaking the language and understand, so that when they're giving you pushback or they're helping define, the regulatory pathway, that you're not doing so blindly. And because in the end, you are responsible for running your company and making decisions. So it's best to educate yourself and bring people inside the company who have skin in the game to help you make the right decisions and move forwards. And this will also help you just interact with your regulatory consultant or experts much better if you can learn to kind of speak the language and understand what you need. And lastly, this also helps you to keep costs down, empowers you to kind of implement engineering updates effectively. What I mean is, if every, once you have a quality management system, as was kind of alluded to, right? When you do engineering changes, when you do things like that, the engineering team needs to be trained to do those kind of changes, document them, and update your technical file and things like that. And if you just kind of completely outsource that, then every time you make a change, the organization can't implement the change. It's beholden to someone else, doing that paperwork and getting back to you on their time frame, which is strategically kind of hard, I think, for fast-moving startups. And the last bits of advice I would give are to expect delays, budget overruns. I love the analogies previously and the emotions, and factor in these contingencies up front. Don't just go into it being blind and wishfully thinking that you're just going to hit a home run from the start. Right? I'll give you an example that happened with us when Brexit was going on. All the notified bodies in Europe got really busy because there were some companies that were based in Britain that now were creating offices in Europe and vice versa and things like that. And at the same time, Europe had reduced the number of notified bodies. So things became super delayed. And that was something that was kind of political, that was out of the control of the startup, right? And another aspect for you guys to really understand is that, and why to build in contingencies is, you're a startup, right? When you're approaching a notified body, you think you have this very cool technology and that they care, but they have much bigger clients, the Fortune 500 medical device companies and things like that, who are their regular customers. So they're always going to be prioritized a little higher. And so it's very easy for you as kind of a under-resourced startup to sometimes get deprioritized. And so those are some just lessons along the way. I'm happy to kind of open it up to questions now, but those were my kind of quick and dirty thoughts. Hope this was helpful to everyone.
Thank you, Shivan. It's always great to hear the experience of a startup that has passed through this process. So we had a couple questions for I guess a little bit for both you and Michelle that were submitted before the event. One of them is a little bit very broad, but could you give me a little bit the differences between the UA and Europe and United States process. Maybe Michelle, you can give just a very quick overview. I know this could be also an entire hour comparison.
For EUAs? Is that what-
Between Europe and United States process.
I'm not very familiar with the European process. I've done several for the US, and all I have to say is that what you think the FDA's understanding of an emergency is very different from what we think is the definition of an emergency. And the EUA, they did not intend to bring new or novel technologies, regardless of the risk to market under EUA. And they said things like, I was working on a ventilator assist device that would prevent you from getting on a ventilator, used largely already cleared devices, but just in a novel configuration and with a novel gas flow system. And this was in the middle of our surge last year. And the FDA said that they were unaware of a continuing need of access to ventilators, and that if needed, they could, like areas in a surge could fly people to areas that weren't in a surge. And I'm like, who's going to pay for that? Like, that's like such a government answer, you know? So it's just the EUA process has been very interesting in terms of the responses I've gotten from the FDA. And again, the differences in understanding of what emergency and what type of products we need access to during that emergency are.
And also not also EUA use.
Yeah. Well, I think Carlos can kind of take a stab at the question as well. Because the question was it about was it about the emergency use authorizations, or was it really about the differences between quality management
both.
systems requirement? Okay.
Both between the emergency use authorization, both in Europe and the USA, and not emergency use authorization. I mean the regular EU CE certification, CE mark versus also FDA clearance / approval.
Right. So yeah, Carlos, do you want to chime in?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
So our device, I don't know if Sivan mentioned it, is 510K exempt, right? This is our device. So the main difference between the FDA and the CE mark is that once we passed the physical testing of the device, right, we register in the FDA, and we could start selling the device immediately in the US. However, in Europe, even if it is not the same classification, is the equivalent classification for Europe, we got to be audited first, right? We have to wait for a whole year until there was an available notified body that could come and audit the manufacturing facilities, and we had to wait 1 year before we can put the device into the market. And this is one big difference. Because
what is your classification in Europe? Because
it's class 2A.
2A. Okay.
Yes, it's class 2A. And it's 1 whole year of difference between the FDA and Europe, right? And that's main difference, one of the main difference, especially for our devices.
I was asking your classification because it will always depend what's your classification in either side, because it may not be exactly
it's
the same.
It's the equivalent classification, right? 510K in FDA, and it's class 2A in Europe, right? Which is more or less the similar classification. And
maybe you can talk about the difference in the standards, right? Because there's a different set of standards that they're mostly overlapped, but they are, and I think addresses the question about how do you make a quality management system compliant with both sides. You have to understand the standards you have to be held to.
Yes, and the other main difference would be in the USA, you have the FDA, which is the only regulatory body, let's say like that, in the USA. But in Europe, you have to be compliant with European regulations, and then each individual country has their own variations for the regulations. So you need to be compliant first to the European, which is with the notified bodies, but then you need to be compliant with the European, with the agency in your own country. For instance, in Spain, we need to be compliant with like the equivalent to the Spanish FDA, right? The Spanish agency, right? But first we need to go to the Europe regulations, and then Spanish regulations, and only then we were able to put the device into the market. So you need to take into account both notified bodies before you put a device into the market in Europe.
Yes, so
it's more paperwork.
Just to take that one step further. So I'm not, I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but like in the US, right, the FDA, those regulations kind of fall under CFR, 21 CFR 820. Is that right, Michelle?
20.
Right. And in Europe, you usually go by ISO 13485. Is that right, Carlos?
Yes.
Yep.
Right. And if you look at them, there's a lot of similarities between those two sets of regulations, but there's some differences. And so what you can do when you're designing your quality management system, you can take that into account. And so make sure you're always designing for each different, let's say, requirement for the in a way that's compliant with both sides. So the hardest one, right? Let's say one side might be easier on, let's say, biocompatibility. I'm just making this up. And the other side is harder. You can go hold yourself to the harder standard, and that way you meet the easier standard as well in your quality management system. And I think the other aspect of the question I saw typed in was, do we work with a one turnkey solution group, or what do we do? We actually work with, we tend to work with smaller independent regulatory consultants and smaller groups. We just have better engagement given that we're, and so we work with two different sides, but we did a lot of vetting on both sides to work with someone who was flexible and could meet our kind of needs. I think there are a lot of turnkey solution larger players. They probably tend to be more expensive. Michelle probably can speak to that more than I can, but we wanted to work with kind of individuals or small groups of individuals on both sides who really knew their stuff, and we could just have a closer relationship with.
So I actually named my business leanRAQA because when I was in industry and I was hiring consultants to help just for resource and bandwidth, I was getting these ridiculous solutions that were not implementable for me with the resources I had, that were going to create compliance issues that were as bad as not having the system in the first place. So yeah, I named it lean because I right size the elements of the quality management system that you need for the activities that you're doing and for the markets that you're doing them in. So we do, we're a little bit of a boutique in that we specialize in startups and small companies because I'm really passionate about finding solutions that are sustainable for small companies, because people lose sight of that so easily.
And that's exactly what we looked for. So I think, Michelle, you could probably agree with this, right? Like when you work with the bigger companies, they tend to put up a lot of people on the bench for your project. Your costs just start inflating, and it gets really scary when you're a startup, right?
Right. Yep. And two, we're not focused on deliverables. We're focused on relationships and being long-term collaborators. So like if a client comes to me and all they want is a 510K and then go on with their lives, it's not the best relationship for me, because I like to collaborate and be part of that continued success and relationship.
I think that's a really important point just for all the entrepreneurs in the audience. I mean, we've done the same thing. Is this ends up being like your corporate counsel or your IP counsel or your board of advisors. These are folks you want the longer they are with you, the less, if you think about switching, let's say regulatory consultants, often you have to bring them up to speed. There's a whole cost and headache to that, and you lose a lot of insight and just collective knowledge that you've amassed together. So I think that's really important.
One thing I really appreciated about what you said earlier is regulatory is business strategy.
Yeah.
If you're making medical products, and as a CEO, you don't have to be the regulatory expert, but you do have to know how it affects your regulatory strategy and how much time and money that you need to get it done. And I also appreciated it, plan for the unexpected. It's the FDA, it's a notified body. They are not on your timeline at all, nor is the test house, So yeah, I'm used to it being, Michelle, what are you doing? That the test house is taking 6 months to do biocompatibility. I'm like,
That's actually a great point, and I think Carlos could speak to this about the test house. So I didn't mention that too explicitly, but just for the audience, Michelle's talking about when there's these standards, and sometimes you have to get your device, externally tested to those standards by an external testing house, right? And you send your device there, and they have their own timelines. And if your device doesn't meet that immediate specification, they'll inform you, and then they send it back, and you have to make modifications, and you can iterate. Now, if you are, let's say you just are completely oblivious to regulatory kind of thinking, that will really slow you down, because you get the device back, then you'll call up your regulatory partner, you'll go do stuff, and then you'll send it back, and then they'll put it in their queue, then they'll test it at some point in the future, then they'll come back. And, Carlos and our team, they would go on site, and they would go because they had armed themselves with that knowledge. They had read those 700 page standards. They didn't know every single word of it, but they were good enough to take decisions, to understand the principles of what they needed to comply with, what they needed to do, and sit on site. And that sped that up, I think, for us. Have you seen that a lot, Michelle?
Well, that and people hiring test houses and just letting them run with the protocols without giving real clear instructions about the intended use, the materials, reviewing the protocol in advance, and then they get unexpected results. And then we're just in a spiral of write a rationale, redesign, retest, what is the right combination? Because at that point, you're likely well behind the 8 ball on your timeline and your budget.
Carlos, do you want to share any nuggets of wisdom on that experience?
Yes.
You've had a lot of it.
This can become a real nightmare, right? For those of you in the startup world, right, that are doing hardware medical devices, like in our case, if you don't take into account the biocompatibility testing, which it's extreme testing, right? These are not simple tests that you do on the device, right? These are extreme testing, and if you don't take into account how to pass this testing since the beginning, since you start designing the hardware, it can slow you down minimum 1 year, right? And it's really important that besides the documentation, right, which is a lot of work, and you should, as Michelle said, you should start documenting your procedures and testing your procedures since the beginning, right, since you start developing your prototype. And at that point, you should also start taking into account how to overcome or how to pass the hardware test, the biocompatibility testing. It's extremely important to take both aspects into account since the beginning of the idea, right? Since the first prototype, you should always take into account this.
Biocompatibility is the one I see go awry the most often, is because it's the area where regulations and expectations are changing very rapidly. It's an area of denial for companies on the rationales that they think that they can write. And then it's the biggest one that I see test houses get wrong with some sort of element of the protocol, like be it the method of extraction or the animal model or any of those things that created unnecessary difficulty in the test results.
For the audience, here's a question for you guys. Would it be helpful if we dove into like a specific, Carlos, I'm kind of thinking like, EMC testing or EMI, right? Because we're talking about stuff so kind of high level abstractly. Audience,
Yes.
what kind of questions do you have? Do you want to?
Well, I still have here a couple of other questions, and
Okay.
I mean, we have people in the audience still from device with biocompatibilities, and we have also devices like more software as medical device, for example. And it's funny that you're talking about biocompatibility and changing the requirements. And I just remember all the cybersecurity requirements that and all these kind of guidance that have been changing lately. A lot. Michelle, I don't know if you want to comment on that also. What has been your experience lately with cybersecurity? Not sure if you have worked with
cybersecurity is one of those areas, especially with the FDA, and I think even the European Union, where there's a lot going on with the regulators behind the scenes in them trying to formulate what they expect and what they want, but they have published very little in terms of those expectations. And a lot of the ways you figure out what they want is during the submission, and it might have changed since the last time you did a submission. I think that the FDA's guidance on cybersecurity, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, it's from like 2014 or something. It's like it's not even relevant anymore, and I think it's still a draft. And they just now published a paper on AI and that whole environment that I believe had some cybersecurity requirements, but it was an initiative paper, not a guidance or how to or any of these things. So a lot of it, you just have to, you need to pick a consultant to help you that does these submissions on a regular basis, because that's sometimes the only way to know.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to wing it. That's for sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
We have, I don't know, Shivan, if you want to comment still on that, but we still have
No,
two more.
I don't have too much experience with that. So yeah.
Okay. We still have two more questions that came through some other means. The initial submission on the registration and through the chat. One question is it possible to change classification after changes, I suppose changes of the device, or would it be submitted as a new product?
That's going to depend on what the changes are for. So changes to intended use are typically always going to require a new submission. So changes to technology, to materials have to be evaluated as to the impacts of those changes. And there are, in the FDA's guidance documents about how to assess a 510K for changes, there's probably about 5 flow charts in the back to help you make those decisions. But I also see people just use the flow charts without actually reading the guidance. And then they misunderstood the flow chart application because they didn't read the context in which they were supposed to make those decisions.
Thank you, Michelle. I think that was quite spot on. We have also another question. Is a medical device that works together with a software considered a combined product? What is the classification?
So combination products are typically things that are drug device combinations. So it's not a combo product by definition. You do have to think about both software and hardware, and then you also have to think about software as a medical device. So if you have a standalone software, that can be a product in and of itself, whether or not it is sold with your hardware. And I have seen companies that had what was initially software as a medical device that ended up developing hardware, and vice versa, had hardware and ended up developing software.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what is exactly the topic and intended use of the device or the devices in this case.
Either way, you need to know ISO 62 or IEC 62304. That's the software development standard. I can't tell you how many customers I get that have some element of software that literally have not one piece of documentation associated with how they develop that software or what it is. And there's probably a half dozen at least documents I have to turn in with a submission about the software development.
Yeah, and nowadays with all these new technologies and software changing as rapidly as it's changing, it's crucial to have this information documented and that and to follow those standards that are relevant to the software as medical device world. So far, there's another question. If you had a device using non-AI algorithms and you try to implement an AI algorithm, maybe an upgrade of sorts, how would you go about for filling it, 510K or on the previous version?
We will typically do a 510K for the first version with what I call the dumb algorithm, and then look at what are our predicates once you have the learning or the AI algorithm done, and then build on that, whether we do have predicates, because that field is changing rapidly as far as devices are getting cleared underneath the 510K process, or do we need to do a de novo? And if we do a de novo, I always think it's better to do it on get your base product cleared, and then you can kind of put blinders on the FDA, like, okay, you just saw this, you just cleared it. Now, all we've done is add this algorithm, and this is what you need to focus on in this submission. You know, we've not changed anything about the safety and technology over here. Focus on just this algorithm piece.
I think that's great. Do you have any last final comments that you would like everyone to know about it?
Would the audience like to hear how someone like Carlos and our engineering team and our CTO kind of got embedded into and learned how to think about this regulatory stuff? Would that be helpful for the audience?
I think so. I think that's what they are here for also.
Carlos, would you like to speak, give a couple thoughts on that?
Yes. So, my main point of advice is don't take this regulatory pathway lightly, right? It's gonna take a lot of time and a lot of resources, especially when startups are resource constrained. It's gonna take a lot. My main involvement have been on the engineering side, right? And it has been a lot of work, a lot of time designing, and not even in the pre-market stage, right? After you got the device into the market, then you still need to do a lot of improvements in the quality control procedures and in the way you make market surveillance, right? And this has taken, in 1 year, it can take up 20% of your time. Just surveillance the market. If there is a problem, you need to come up with a solution to solve the problem, and then you need to do all the regulations for that modifications to get approved, right? It's a lot of time, a lot of resources, and it's not something to take lightly, saying, oh, that getting the CE mark or the FDA approval is something easy and it's going to be right away, right? Because it can, as Shivan said, it can prevent you from getting into the market. And if you don't do it well, it can take you out of the market really, really fast. That's my main piece of advice.
I would also suggest, when you interview, different regulatory consultants and see someone who you can communicate with well, who, like Michelle said, they are geared for your type of company, your field of device. This is someone you're going to have to talk to a lot. If you feel you can't communicate with them well, you just don't see eye to eye, then that's, you need to work on that relationship and then work with them to get trained, right? Like, ask them to tell you which standards you need to start learning. And I would really recommend reading those standards. That's something that I did as CEO, our CTO did, Carlos did as director of engineering. We read all those standards, and, like I said, we didn't have them memorized. We didn't understand absolutely every single word in a 700-page document, but we dedicated enough time and energy to it to understand the principles and how to think about it, because that's how we started educating ourselves into how to think about this, how to speak about it, how to work effectively with our regulatory experts about it, how to work with the regulatory agencies about it. So, and it's not just one person on the team. I think a lot of different folks who are on the team who are designing and developing the product. It's good that they get some exposure to this, so that when they are thinking about in the pre-market phase, when you're doing R&D and development, that they understand some of the constraints, and they take that into account, so that you don't go into manufacturing, go do clinical, go do this, standards testing, and then have to change your manufacturing process, So like there's some regulations on having exposed metal parts, and are those conductive and things like that. And if you built a device that had an exposed metal part, let's say, and you set up all the manufacturing, you got the vendors, you did all that, and the engineering team never looked at that standard, right? And then it goes to the testing laboratory and it says, hey, it's not going to pass. Now you got to go change that part. You got to go change all that process. Why didn't those design engineers get a little educated up front and avoid that mess? Or the same goes with electromagnetic communication interference. What's the intended use of the device? Where's it going to be used? What are the standards that it's going to, in terms of the electromagnetic radiation it emits and, how it impacts it? Is this being used in an OR where there's very sensitive electrical systems, or is it being used in a completely different context, and, designing that shielding in upfront instead of later on. So that's why I think it is very important to learn enough so that you can make good design decisions, not just business decisions as well.
I really want to second that, and to see that level of ownership coming from a CEO of a startup is like such a relief for me, because I had the joke of the dogs fighting, like R&D and quality, but that we, as regulatory and quality, I get told that's your job, and it can't be one person's job. That responsibility and that ownership has to be cross-functional, because the product is cross-functional, and you need everybody at the end of the day to understand what the requirements are. Good, bad, or ugly. They are what they are, and us regulatory people don't do this for a hobby on the weekends. We're not just writing this stuff to see how we can torture everybody. It's ultimately for patient safety, and and so just take the responsibility and find a collaborator. At the end of the day, I can't be responsible for your product. I can't be responsible for your design. I can't be responsible if you fail because you, for any of the reasons he mentioned, you didn't plan for success. And then treat regulatory like your business strategy. So, and then a sidebar, I also want to reiterate what their experience was with the MDR, over a year ago. And that was like earlier in MDR. It's only worse now for small companies and startups. So if you think CE is in your future, you need to get in line like yesterday, because you're going to be doing good if you can find anybody that will even quote you right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just so everyone knows, MDR is medical device regulations, and that standard change. It got updated from, what was it, 2012 to 2016 or something like that?
2000, yeah, to 2017.
Yeah, something like that, right? And we're sitting in year 2020 is when it went into effect, something like that, right?
And now,
So it gives you,
the clock is still going to May of
Right.
May 26th of 21.
26.
right.
So
How many days, Michelle?
they're going to keep pushing. Oh gosh, we're probably in the 70s now.
Yeah.
But they're going to keep. Everybody thinks they're going to keep pushing it down the road, but they've used this year to get ready and put some of the infrastructure in that wasn't there in 2020. So the commission has continued to get ready, and industry has continued to think that they're going to push it. So it's going to be a really interesting paradox when everything finally hits the fan.
For sure. For sure. So thank you very much, Michelle, Shiva, and Carlos. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Thank you so much for this amazing discussion. I think you gave our participants a lot of good tips. So guys, start now if you want to get ready. And we also thank you also for participating and being here. Before ending, please take 2 minutes to fill out our feedback survey. We'd love to hear what you thought of this session, and also if you have some suggestions or next sessions, we'll love to hear you. We have given the link on the chat, and also if you're not yet a member of the community, join our community. You have also the link on the chat. I think it's not working. We'll send the link for the survey correctly. And if you want to register, you can register to our community in alumni.eithealth.eu. So stay tuned for our next sessions, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
All right. See you, Celia. See you, Adriano. Hope that went well.
Hello, Shivang, Carlos, and everyone.